back to the Small Bean Services program, Directorpiece Theater. This is probably not the best time, but I have to say, Scientology changed my life. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to yet another episode of Directorpiece Theater, the show in which two of your favorite directors from the website, which shall not be named, go through your favorite movies and talk about why they are or are not artistically crafted. I am one of your hosts, Adam Ganser, and with me is my co-host.
Shit, I did the exact opposite this time. God damn it. I'm
You
so
monster.
sorry.
I knew it.
I'm so sorry. Usually I come in late. Now I came in early. I'll get this right. I swear to God. I'm Abe Epperson.
I'm starting to feel like a joke
co-host.
caddy for you. Like I'm just teeing it up, and then you're coming in there with the wood, just knocking it out of the park every time.
That's what they always say about me. It's
yeah,
true.
that you're
Coming in with
a
the
joke. That's true. That's on several message boards that I'm a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Abe's
Good
always
message
coming in with
boards.
that wood. Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
It's active. It's an active
Yeah,
board.
I know exactly what message boards you're on.
It's just you and me on this thread talking about how you're always bringing the wood. What a great
Yeah.
thread.
Wait, texts aren't message boards? I thought they were message boards. Did I miss something? All right.
Yeah, we got some real
what-
problems.
So last episode we talked about A Knight's Tale,
Yeah.
and you said that this episode we're talking about Basic Instinct. For people who have not read the video that they clicked on, what's going on here? What do you want to talk about?
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
What the hell are you doing?
I want to hear your argument this time, Adam.
Well, I'm ready to make it. So what I want to do is I want to talk about why Basic Instinct is essentially the first meta-narrative by Paul Verhoeven. And it's essentially like a satirical or meta-narrative film more than it is an actual story. So those of you who've been listening to the content at Small Beans for quite some time and are caught up on all the frame rate podcasts know that you guys did a frame rate about Starship Troopers, which is one of Paul Verhoeven's films, and talked about how that film is in fact a satirical take on the book, right?
Yeah.
You went into some detail about that. So my argument here is that Basic Instinct is essentially the turning point for Paul Verhoeven when he stopped making movies that were explicitly just a story and started making movies that were a commentary or satire of either the genre that he was doing or of the source material. And so I want to talk about how Basic Instinct is that.
And just for the uninitiated, can you kind of go into what is a meta-narrative?
Absolutely. So a meta-narrative is basically a story that's about itself. So it's a story that is aware of itself as a story, if that makes sense. And that's a thing that is becoming increasingly common in our films and videos, in this age, because we are all sort of have a giant reservoir of pop culture knowledge now, and movies and television are aware that we have that reservoir, and so therefore can draw on it in a more self-aware way. But Basic Instinct came out in, I believe it was 1992, before it was assumed that everyone had that gigantic reservoir of knowledge, and so it's sort of an early precursor to what is now commonly the case about movies and television.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So
Now,
it's like a leitmotif for typical stories. It's when you say self-aware, you mean that like it's kind of going through the motions of the events that we have come to learn are things.
Yeah,
events in the story of a typical story of like a film noir,
correct,
or something like that.
It's hitting all the beats that are required of the genre that it's in, but but it's not necessarily doing it explicitly just to tell the story. It's also sort of commenting on the beats themselves and the tropes and like
what does this mean?
These kind of stories in general, right? Like it's doing that. And like again, just to illustrate, there's a bunch of movies that fit into this genre. Like I think you could call Brick, the film noir movie from 2005 that launched Ryan Johnson's career. I think you could call that a meta narrative if you wanted to. Just movies like that sort of are aware of the genre tropes, playing against the genre tropes, and are sort of winking like, isn't it fun when it's a movie?
A lot of I would say a lot of Shane Black stuff.
Yes, he's also
Kiss Kiss
there.
Bang Bang.
Yes,
a lot of noirs, as we'll see.
I think it's because noir is not a genre that on its own right is still drawing people to theaters. So the way to do a noir is to kind of play the tropes that we're all familiar with and then comment on them, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
that's generally true.
Cool.
Yeah. So just let's refresh ourselves on the movie Basic Instinct. So I think most people think of this movie as being like essentially an erotic thriller, which it is. Like, let's not pull our punches. It's an erotic thriller. But they probably don't remember much about it except for, Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas really get it on, and also probably the interrogation scene where she uncrosses her legs. I think that's a pretty famous shot in movie history.
It's the most famous.
Yeah. So just to kind of catch you up, Basic Instinct is like definitely a melodrama, which is to say that it's always over the top. It's not pretending to not be over the top. It's always so it's very much like a big version of those kinds of movies, and that's basically Paul Verhoeven's style, right? Like if you've seen RoboCop or if you've seen Total Recall or Showgirls or any of his movies, I think you can say Paul Verhoeven's not a subtle filmmaker. He's much more of a loud, blast in your face filmmaker. And Basic Instinct fits the pattern. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, if you want, like in Starship Troopers, if he wants you to think that someone's a Nazi, he'll dress him like a Nazi.
right. He's not trying to trick you or like trying to make you think really analytically about his films. I'd say he's like a lot more like, here's what I want to say. You're going to feel that very strongly. And I think he's also not embarrassed by sort of like pulpy stuff that would feel dumb in other works. Like, for instance, there's an amazing line that Jean Triplehorn says, like, when she's arguing with Michael Douglas's character about Sharon Stone. She's like, she's evil, she's brilliant. Like, she says those two words together. And it's like, that's the tone of the movie. If you don't remember it, that's probably a pretty good description of the tone of the movie.
And you're supposed to believe both of those things.
Right. True. And it's very much like it belongs in a 50s advertisement, right? Like it's definitely of that time in a way.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that because it's over the top or melodramatic that means it's a meta story, like it's not believable. I'm going to show you how it's like basically self-aware in a way that you can't take the actual story itself at face value. Like that's how far this goes. Okay.
Great.
So the first thing I want to start with the end, actually, which normally I don't. So the end of Basic Instinct starts with, or finishes with, I should say, revealing that Sharon Stone's character, who, by the way, if you don't remember, is essentially a writer, a multimillionaire heiress turned writer, who writes murder mystery stories and then is being accused in this movie of having pre-written a crime that she then later committed. So she writes these stories and then she commits the murders in exactly the way that she depicts them in her novels, is the theory of the movie.
And
right?
That's the end of the movie.
It's very silly, right? Like that's a silly, and also I think we can agree a meta premise, right? Like it's a story within a story right off the top, right?
Right.
So
a writer,
right? So exactly. So the movie is essentially navigating: is she really the killer? Is this somebody who's playing against type here and sort of like copycatting so that she looks guilty? So like those are the two possibilities of the movie. And after I would say the movie definitively states she is not the murderer, spoilers, she does not commit the murders, specifically the one that starts the film. Then we get this love scene at the end with her and Michael Douglas, and we pan down the bed and reveal that she has an ice pick under the bed, implying perhaps she is in fact a murderer, right? Mm-hmm. Even though we've definitively solved the case. She did not murder these people. Like, it's not possible for her to have murdered the people. If you work out all the loose ends, it's not possible. But we're still saying that she's the murderer at the end. So why? Why does she have that ice pick down there at the end? It doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So that's the moment where I think Paul Verhoeven is taking off the mask and saying, like, it never really was meant to hang together. It's more about, like, aren't these stories absurd and stupid and fun, right? Like,
yeah, it's also kind of, see, that the way I watched that and read that, and I didn't read any of your theory beforehand or anything like that.
I love this.
I read it as, because it does this very strange thing, which is it has a scene where they're in bed, and then it fades out.
Right. It does do that.
And then it fades back in. So it like feels like end of movie. And then it fades back in and we're still in the same scene. It's almost like it's giving us reality that there's two different answers.
Yes, it is doing
Beth
that.
is the killer or Catherine is the killer. And so if you lob off the second part, you think one thing, or if you let it play, you think the other thing. But it's kind of this duality where it's both like take which one you want. Which I thought was very interesting because it was just kind of like, and I don't know, if it doesn't fucking matter how it ends, because you're supposed to. I think if you believe that, like you said, if Catherine is like been proven that she can't really have done these things, that means that there's a whole nother story, like kind of like an Ocean's 11 retcon that has to be done, where it explains that she actually was like employing people and she made it work somehow. Or she paid people off to do it, and there's a lot that you weren't seeing. And so you're arguing that Paul Verhoeven is saying, like, it's kind of one or the other, but that's what you get with these types of tales?
Yes, I think, and I also think he's saying that, like, that essentially erotic thrillers as a genre are needlessly, like, are fictitious and not possible. Like, I think he's intentionally making the point that it's not real. It can't be real.
Okay, so it's what I said, or... Isn't it stupid?
Right. And I don't think he intends to tell you, isn't it stupid? Like, I don't think he's making fun of the genre as much as I think he's like sort of celebrating the absurdity of the genre, if you will.
Okay.
Right. So now I want to go to the very beginning of the movie. Right. So the first thing is the ending tells us this. The second thing is the beginning tells us this. All right. So the beginning of the movie is a bunch of like fractured images that are like out of focus shots of a woman having sex, right? Like that's what it is. But you don't know for sure because it's too out of focus. And the implication is as we add piece by piece that we're trying to piece together what are we looking at? What are we actually seeing? What, right? In a very like mystery fashion, like what is this about, right? And then it cuts to the first actual image of the movie, which is an overhead mirror of two people having sex in which the first murder happens, right? So I think what we're saying there is that like right away there's an unreliability to all the images we're going to see, right? Like we're not going to see exactly what happened. We're going to see a reflection of what happened that isn't necessarily true. And we repeat this motif with the mirrors throughout the movie. Right? Like it happens all the time. So let me just give you a couple of quick examples of it. The first one is when we meet Roxy, who is herself kind of, she's like the lesbian lover of Sharon Stone's character, Catherine, who also kind of looks like her, right? And I think the purpose of Roxy is explicitly to be a decoy, right? Like, oh, it could be her. She might be the one doing the murders, right? So when we first meet her, we meet her at a different house that's one of the two houses Catherine owns, and she's standing in front of a mirror. When we have the confrontation with Nick after he's had sex with Catherine, and then it turns out Roxy was watching from some strange hidden alcove that we don't see, they have the confrontation in a mirror. Like we're looking in a bathroom mirror, right, at Roxy, which is just sort of implying that we're not getting the truth about this character or really any of these characters, that we're getting reflections of them. So, and I think like one of the great like litmus test version of this is like the first time that we see Sharon Stone explicitly stripping down to basically naked, we're in her house, right, where she's dressed in an outfit that she apparently just wants to change. Like there's no reason for her to be in a different outfit than the one she wants to be interrogated in.
Oh, yeah,
because she knows they're coming to interrogate her. Like she's not an idiot. She knows that, right? So it's pretty clear that she's putting like a theatrical little play on for Nick, which is sort of one of the through lines of the movie. Is she seducing Nick, or is she like playing it? Like to what extent is this her setting Nick up to be another murder victim, or is there actual affection here? Which one is it, right? So, but it's clear that she's playing cat and mouse games to a level like that no person accused of murder could ever do.
It is, she's so heavy with it.
It's so much. It's so much. It's a lot. That's kind of what makes you
exhausting.
Yeah. It makes you smile because it's so much. that you're like, you can't take it seriously, which is another point I'm going to make in a minute. So Nick sees that she has all these headline clippings about how he shot some people and he shouldn't have, and he was been on administrative leave, et cetera, implying like, hey, I'm looking into you, right? And he can see that. Then he turns the corner and there she is, stripping naked, right? Like, in a way that's like, how do you not know that somebody could see you? Well, clearly she does.
She actually has to avoid her eyes while like approaching.
Yes, and so
like they're both very. I also noticed that I was like, first off, dude, you just turn a corner and you go, "Whoa, naked lady." First thing I would do is like turn around and walk away.
You can't keep going in there. That's
he
for
does
sure.
Not.
Yes.
He does not. He keeps looking.
Right.
And then she zips up and then she's like putting on a scarf as she walks toward him, and he still hasn't left. Like he's still looking at her, and then he slowly goes, I guess I'll leave. And she has to like avoid looking forward, which is the natural state you would.
Totally
when you're,
impossible.
Like, walking.
Yeah.
Everything is impossible.
So just briefly, and this like reinforces the exact point I want to make, which is that so he sees her naked through a window in the house. He comes around the corner, and we think we're actually looking straight down into the bedroom. But it turns out when she walks out, it was a mirror that was set up exactly to see her stripping down, right? Because she comes from a different angle.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which is, again, so like you never actually get an honest depiction of her. She's always being represented or just sort of regularly being represented through mirrors and reflections and being obscured by various objects, right? So the point being, from a visual motif, we cannot trust what we're seeing, right? What we're seeing is not, in fact, the whole story, right? Now, just to go back to the beginning of the movie, so we see the murder happen, and the setup for the murder happened through the headboard. Like there's a metal headboard, and we're like looking through that, which sort of, again, is another way of fracturing or distorting the image so you don't see everything really clearly. But like, I just want you to think about what is actually happening as the story, like from the having seen the whole movie. So what's actually happening, according to the movie, is that Jean Triplehorn, a person that this rock star who's going to get murdered knows, right? He knows her. Dr. Garner, she's going by. So Dr. Garner, he knows her. They meet up after he has had drinks with Catherine. And he's like, hey, could you put on a blonde wig and look kind of like my current girlfriend while we have sex? And she's like, yes, let's do that. And then murders him. And it's like, why would that ever happen? That's totally ridiculous. You know?
That's how they fuck. That's how they do it.
I know, and I understand, like, we're supposed to believe, oh, well, she's a copycat and she's like envious and et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of a big ask. I feel like it's
a huge ask.
Yeah,
everything.
It's not really possible.
That's her charm in the movie, is that she's just fucking out from left field,
right?
Just like coming out.
Totally impossible. Yeah. Well, and but so is everybody. Like Elizabeth Garner. Elizabeth Garner, the character played by Jean Triplehorn, is completely irrational as a character. I don't mean as a human being. I mean as a character. There's no logic to what she does, because she's quote unquote so in love with Nick that she puts her professional and personal life in unbelievable harm's way in order for it to work. Right?
As a psychiatrist sleeping with your,
That's impossible. You can't do that.
It's not even a client. It's a, like court ordered, you have to go to therapy cop.
Right. It's that's a punchline in a James Bond movie, not an actual plot element that's allowed to persist in a real cop movie. Right. Which again is all to say that we're creating the understanding for the audience. This is not this is not on the level. You can't trust what you're seeing here, right? This is not really happening the way it's being depicted. Okay, so which means that what we're doing is we're setting up a movie that's more about sort of laughing and enjoying the tropes and not about a story you can take on its face value. All right, so so one of my biggest points here is all the side characters in this movie are desperately trying to teach Nick exactly what to do. They are really.
They just outright say it.
Yeah, they do. They outright say it, and it's not even in like a well plotted way. It's like in a, hey Nick, what do you think about this answer to this mystery we're looking at? And like you can't believe that it would happen that way. And it's not because the movie's bad. It's not that it's bad. It's that like there's actually kind of a weird unreality to it. So here's a couple illustrations. So Roxy, the first time we meet her, again in the mirror, she's putting up her hair, which is to say that she is telegraphing for everyone the fact that, hey, the answer to this mystery is a wig. Right? Ultimately, a wig is the answer to this mystery, and she's telegraphing that. Again, Catherine also telegraphs that one of the first times that we meet her when she goes into the interview. She puts up her hair for reasons that are like, why did you do that? Okay? So the lieutenant, who is Nick's supervisor, is the one who sort of posits the either-or theory. Right? About like, he's the one who's like, hey, isn't this the woman who writes the story that this exact murder parallels? He's the one who posits that theory, which means he has to have read the novel, right? He has to have read that novel. And then later on, he's the one who debunks the theory. He's just sort of like, that's horseshit. What are you, a book critic now, Nick? And it's like, well, wait a minute. You're the one that pitched this idea. So like, how can you also be the one turning it down? Right? And he does a lot of things like that. So like he keeps pushing Nick in exactly the right way to make him do exactly what he needs to do to solve the mystery. Sometimes it's through positing, here's the theory to take from this. Sometimes it's through negative reinforcement, but it's always pushing him in exact like the solution to the murder. It's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like if you're trying to get someone to believe in an idea, a good thing is to make them think that they had the idea all along. So one way of doing that might be to present the idea in one way, and then to have have them combat any argument against that theory, so that they take the side of the original theory.
Right. He knows how good the idea is, and then he dismisses it just to make his detective work harder to solve it.
I need you to think of this idea, dude.
Right.
That's why I thought most of the time, and I think like most people, there's a crazy amount of this movie where you're just like, all right, so obviously everyone's in on it.
Right. It does feel like that, doesn't it? It feels like
you
everyone
always think like, okay, Beth, and they're making this plot that Beth was like super into Sharon Stone, and then you're like, oh, okay, no, maybe it was the reverse. They're doing all this stuff, and you're like, none of it makes clear sense. So I bet what it is they're into it together, and they're gonna kill him because he. Like for some poetic version, like because he shot someone or something,
right?
You know, like
exactly,
and it affected them, or you're gonna assume something will be revealed. But every now and then you stop and go, but then they would have like preempted that. They would have said like, you shot someone and like you destroyed a family or something like
right.
that. And
they
turns
would
out they're sisters. And it was right at the time that they were born. Like
right.
You'd usually do something like
right.
that, and they did none of that.
No,
so
they didn't do any of it.
That would just be a bad movie. And then they just. When you think they're gonna zig, they zag. It's very, like it's the same thing happens all the time with. We see many photos of them with different hair colors.
Yes, we see that several times.
Like we see them back in college and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's like, it's unclear to me. And I was following very specifically like what was going on. They do maneuvers. Well, now this should be a shot of her being a blonde and her being a brunette.
Right.
Now this should be a shot of both of them being blonde.
Right.
Okay, I see now where you're developing. And then they like show you, no, they're actually both brunette. And you're like, well, what the fuck are you trying to say with these pictures?
Yeah, it does intentionally obfuscate in a way that's like, it feels frustrating. Yeah, it feels like the director's making mistakes. But he's not. He's not making mistakes. And it feels like the writer's really sloppy, but he's not. He's not sloppy. Like this is intentionally sort of meant to trigger your feeling of like, wait a minute, right? And just in case anybody thinks I'm like overreading into this and like fixing a broken movie, I just want us all to remember that the last movie that Paul Verhoeven made was Total Recall. And in Total Recall, which again, Sharon Stone was in, so he knows the actress. That's a movie about is any of this real, right? That's the fundamental question of that movie. Is any of this real? Mm-hmm. You know, because it's a Philip K. Dick adaptation. So he's interested in that theme, right? And he's interested in the theme of perception. Again, we go back to RoboCop. RoboCop's a movie about a cop who loses his humanity, and then sort of like, does he have it anymore or not? You know, and so this is a natural evolution of that theme, I think. Just to make a defense for it. Couple other
I think
go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
for sure.
A couple other just side character things that are baffling. So like a lot of this happens in the first act. That's when a lot of the craziest things happen. So right up top, it's the detectives who realize that Nick and Catherine have a cat and mouse game, not Nick. Nick's just like trying to like get about his day, and they keep bringing up like they keep saying things to him like, it takes one to know one with you and her, right? Like, she's as crazy as you are, Kearns. Like, literally everybody's making the connection, like, you guys are like kindred spirits, and like you should like find out about her, but also stay safe. And she's like, right, and he's just trying to be a detective, like, in the world, It's like it feels leading, for sure. The maid that lets Nick into the first house when he knocks on the door, like, hey, we're here to interview Catherine over this murder. Catherine's not home, so why the hell does the maid open the door? That's not a mistake, because she opens the door and there at the top of the staircase is the decoy. So why the hell did the maid open the door? You know what I mean? Like, that legitimately doesn't make sense. And don't tell me like, oh, it's because it's a dumb filmmaker or mistakes. This guy knows what he's doing, right? You would not make that mistake, would you? Would you make that mistake?
No, not absolutely.
I would not make that mistake either, and I don't think he did either. I think it's on purpose.
So many times people get into until it becomes a joke. Like, everyone's getting into people's houses that not once, but like 3 times. Right. I think someone says like, "How'd you get in here?"
It happens a lot in this movie. People just walk into these like houses.
Oh, I let myself in, kind of stuff. Like, what is happening? Why is everyone just walking into rooms?
Yes, I agree, and that's, I think it's. Again, because those thriller novels, and they're not the high art novels. These are like the ones you see at the grocery store, right? They're dumb like that. You know what I mean? Like, they're intentionally silly like that. And I think it's intentionally lowering the quality of the story to match those tropes. And I think that's really cool. So Nick's sidekick. Yeah, right? Nick's sidekick, Gus. I think he's one of my favorite movie characters because
sidekick. You mean his partner?
Yeah, well, but in this movie he's a sidekick. Let's be honest.
Okay.
So just like, I all due respect to the actor, I think this is one of the most uneven performances I've ever seen in a movie. And I'm not. I believe that he was told to do that because I think this guy knows what he's doing as an actor. So like, up top, he's like gleefully enjoying this weird. This woman's like obvious seduction and death threats. Like, he loves it, like, watch his expression. And then when it suits him, he starts really worrying about the fate of his partner when, like, if you're a cop, right away this woman is trouble, don't get involved with him. And he's like sort of winking at his partner the whole time, like, she seems like she's going to be a handful, you know what I mean? Yeah. Also, he's the one who offers up the major motif of this movie, which is to say the reason why Catherine's getting involved with Nick in the first place is that she's trying to write a new novel about a new person who's going to die at the end called Shooter.
Yeah.
Right? And he's the one who says that. He like looks at her again in a mirror. He adjusts his rearview mirror and he says, "You working on a new book?" to explain her bizarre behavior. It doesn't make any sense. Like, she asks Nick for a cigarette. She says, "You got a cigarette?" He's like, "I don't smoke." She's like, "Huh, won't last." And then she pulls out her own cigarette. And then Nick's like, "I thought you said you didn't smoke." And she's like, "Oh, did you want one?" And it's like, what? What are we doing here? And then Gus adjusts the window or the mirror and he goes, "You working on a new book, lady?" It's like, what? You can't believe it.
Everyone on the force as well is fucking weird.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
They're so weird about. So something that I don't know if we've mentioned yet is that Michael Douglas's character Nick has, like, in the past, the reason why he's going to therapy and stuff like that, and met Beth, is because he used to be like a druggie. He used to do cocaine.
Yes.
He lost his
edge.
Ruined his marriage.
Yeah.
He got suspended and stuff like that, like crazy. Like, he was alcoholic.
He couldn't still be a
like
cop.
Mid quitting all of those things.
Right.
And she walks into his life, Sharon Stone, and immediately all of his friends see him drinking They see him like doing weird, like fucking anyone, like just being the womanizer they used to be. And no, people at times will go, "Oh, like you shouldn't do that," and then at other times it's like, fucking Nick.
It's right, and it's like, so when he goes back to drinking, this happens in a bar with his colleagues, who, by the way, are hanging out with him in a bar. That's not the coolest thing in the world.
And they kind of jab him for it, which I guess I can see how that's awkward.
He takes a drink. And Internal Affairs is there immediately, like, starting a fight with him, and they still don't stop him from drinking. They still don't like, hey, man, IA's here. Maybe you want to put the double blackjack down, you know? No, they just let it go.
He does say, I'm not on duty right now, so I can do whatever the fuck I want. So it's just bad decisions. But instead, the guy goes, like, he calls him, like, shooter. He, like, says, like, what do you think of that, shooter? And stuff like that.
I know.
Like, he is being unprofessional in, like... The IA agent is being more unprofessional somehow. It's just not how I expected that sequence to go, knowing how movies usually are, where the guy is doing something wrong. Someone's going to step in and be like, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Here's a conflict that is immediate now. Verhoeven's like, yeah, that's cool. That's a conflict, but I'm going to make a new conflict where everyone's just fucking nuts.
Like, nobody in this movie is going to have any rationality to it. And so, like, just so everybody understands, like, I've seen RoboCop, as has Abe, so I understand that his depiction of cops is always a little over the top, right? And that trend continues all the way through Starship Troopers, et cetera, et cetera.
He fucking hates him.
Well, he hates him, and also he thinks they're like cartoon monsters, you know? So, like, this is in tone with that, but just to underscore what you just said, so, like, the IA guy calls him shooter, and then there's an implied exchange of a case file with Catherine, like somehow she buys a case file, is implied but never proven, and she starts calling him shooter, and then titles the name of her novel Shooter, almost as though, like, this whole thing.
Right, that's how he kind of knew it was the IA agent.
That's the connection he makes, but there's never any proof that case file was actually transferred.
Yeah, because he just gets shot.
Right, but he gets shot by Dr.
That's another thing a lot of cops say at times. It's just something that, like, and then it just didn't pan out.
Right.
Like, it's like, oh, you studied the case, you looked into the facts, and did you ever do any research on this woman? Because I'm doing an investigation right now, and she's at the heart of this crime, and it's very similar. He's like, no, we didn't actually ask her any questions. Why not? Just, one thing after another, nothing really made sense to really investigate her at all. And it's just like, really? Because everything from my standpoint, and I'm looking at it from the future, like, you should have been able to know that then. Like, you don't get the feeling that they're totally incompetent, but you get the feeling like some magic is going on,
right,
that is making these people invincible to some forms of questions, because it just happens constantly, and it's not done in like a generation kill way where it's like, look at how idiotic they're acting. It's not that they're idiots, it's just that they are presenting the facts as if, like, well, we all were talking about it and we thought about it and we just didn't do it. And it's like, are you under a spell of some kind?
Right. How does this not occur to you? And, like, again, they're not the kinds of things that are like, oh, we're just a lot smarter than the screenwriter and director. They're the kinds of things that, if you're a filmmaker, these aren't accidents. They're not bad screenwriting and they're not bad filmmaking. They're choices. And
I think that's only because if you can design a theory around them, and it's absolutely airtight, that's obviously what's going on.
Right. I mean, and that's what I'm hoping I'm doing now, but you will tell me at the end, I'm sure. So
moving on.
Yeah. So, just a couple more things Gus does that are just baffling. So one of them is he shows up at night when Nick is, like, typing on a computer just to tell him about this friend that Catherine's meeting with, who was a convicted murderer. And then they make this joke that's like, well, what are you doing here? And he's like, I was going to spank it with the computer. Like, he literally had no reason to be there. He just showed up to give this information. And then I'm gonna come back to the theme of masturbation a little bit later, because it matters. But, like, it's the kind of thing that, like, isn't even bothered to be plotted away. It's, like, not even explained away. It's, like, mentioned and then sort of acknowledged. This doesn't really hang together. It doesn't totally make sense. He also is the one that mentions have you ever met a friend of Catherine's who didn't kill somebody? And the only person who fits that exact description is Dr. Garner, who ends up being the person who did all these murders. You know what I mean? So he just sort of shows up at convenient times to push Nick exactly where he needs to go to solve the crime when he would otherwise have hit a dead end. And then he sort of pretends to not want Nick to go through with this. Like, everybody's like, Nick, no, you shouldn't do this anymore, man. Let it go. But like, they also keep pushing him with the exact kind of questions that are going to lead him where he needs to go. It's totally crazy.
You sold me on people acting irrational in this movie.
Okay, good. I'm gonna move on to my next thing. So, and you're gonna like this so as a director, our job is to make sure that the actors are performing it in a way that is in tone with the story that you're trying to tell. Right? We're the ones who give the actors, like, you're playing it with this intent, and then also you're playing it to this degree. So let's just comment on what the acting says about these characters. And the biggest thing is, everyone is having the best time of their life in this movie. There is not a single person in this movie who's bummed about these murders. They are all loving this. Like, even
That's kind of true.
Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of just say, oh, that's just because they're so used to like murders that like even when they like walk in on a homicide like scene, like they're just like making jokes about like, oh, this guy's a rock star, cool,
right?
Or like playing with stereos and
right, and
like they're just fucking don't give a fuck.
There's that one line that I wrote down as an observation that I was going to make to you later, where like they're standing in front of a Picasso. And they're standing in front of an actual Picasso. They're like, rock and roll, huh? And it's like both like the most sarcastic line in the world, and also like nobody would ever say that. Like, it's just, they're just playing the tropes so hard.
And I believe if the point of that scene is like at one point he goes like, oh, it's a Picasso, huh? He's like, didn't expect you to know who Picasso was. He's like, I do. It's like, good scene.
So
talking about the art and if people know who Picasso is.
So let me talk about Sharon Stone's character, okay? Because I think she's the one that sort of is the tone setter for this movie, because she's literally the did she do it, did she not character. So she has the best time of her life when she's under investigation for murder. Like, she's having the greatest time. She's loving this. The cat and mouse is like absolutely enjoyable for her in every way. She has no fear at any point of the investigation. That never bothers her. The only time that we get an actual human being is when she's asked questions about her emotional attachments to other people. Right? Whenever anybody talks about,
and they spell that out.
Yes.
Is she a sociopath?
Yes.
Because it's almost like as soon as they define it for the audience, they kick into gear.
Right.
All right. So Sharon Stone was watching the movie with us and knows now to convince us as the viewer that she's not a sociopath. So the next scene will be her crying about her dead friend or something.
Yes. So, I have to make another point. I'm going to come back to it. So briefly, she whenever she's asked if she loves somebody and like it actually hits a wound, that's when she gets actual emotion, and it's usually like moody. She gets moody and wants to quit and not talk about it anymore, which is part of who her character is. Because I think if you had to sum up her character as a whole, it's everyone in my family, like everyone I love dies, and I'm afraid of losing anybody, so I push people away, but I love the cat and mouse game, right? Like, that's the character. And that's a real thing, and that doesn't super bother me, but that wouldn't add to, boy, do I love being investigated for murder. Whereas, like, there's a moment after she's had sex with Nick where he's like, I'm still going to nail you because you're the murderer. And the biggest smile comes over her face, like, oh, thank God you still think I'm the murderer. It's baffling. Okay, so you just said something that was really key, right? Which is that she... she's like playing along with us, right? Like, that's a thing that you feel like
she's watching the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like when we watch her take the polygraph, by the way, she's looking into camera at the end of that scene through a television screen, which is yet another obfuscation. The only time she ever answers the question about did you do this or did you not, the shot in that interrogation scene is a dead-on dolly shot right into her that is not obfuscated at all. It's the most direct, honest shot you could make of her. It has like no point of view attached to it. It's not from anybody's vantage point. It's from no vantage point at all. So it's literally just us looking at her. She looks right at us and denies the murder, and it feels fake. And the reason it feels fake is because we've intentionally created such a meta narrative of obfuscation that when you remove the obfuscation, we feel uneasy about it, and it doesn't work. And that's a director
like a Picasso.
You're welcome from your joke, Caddy.
It's actually not a bad theory though. I mean, they usually are portraits,
right? No, I think you're right. No, but really, like, find another shot in the movie that is detached from point of view like that. It's the only one in the movie, and it's clearly like the director sort of having a great time at our expense, which is to say, I'm going to give you the exact truth, and I'm going to shoot it in the most truthful way I can, and because I do that, you won't believe it. You know, and that's when I knew this was like a well thought out directed movie. Was like that is
because
genius.
They're like showing their hand a little bit and saying like, we want you to think this now.
Yeah, I'm going to use
most of directing.
Right, I'm going to use the tools that should communicate truth, and they'll feel like a lie in this movie because of what I've done. That's a director who knows what he's doing.
That is a meta narrative tactic.
Yes, exactly. So another thing is, Catherine goes way out of her way to continue to incriminate herself. Like, so if you were under murder, like any other movie, if you're under investigation for murder, maybe you have a good time because of the seduction, but you definitely keep denying things or keep like hiding things. Like, so for instance, Chinatown, right? That's like a damsel in distress who could be implicated to some degree in this water stealing scheme, right? And what does she do? She keeps trying to misdirect things in order to place the blame away from her, but also to hide the things she doesn't want you to know, right? Catherine.
Yeah, it's like OJ walking around casually wearing black gloves. It's like she uses an ice pick all the time.
Yes, she intentionally uses an ice pick when she doesn't have to. She intentionally.
It's like, hey, murder weapon me.
Right.
That's weird, right? Funny.
She keeps telling him, like, I could beat a lie detector test. Couldn't you too? She never at any time ever posits a different theory for how the murders could have happened. Never. Right? And she also, like, she intentionally uses the shooter nickname, which she knows, if she's like worth anything, knows is going to be a trigger for Nick, because she knows she's getting it from the IA guy, and the IA guy is like his most loathsome enemy, and then she uses that on purpose to continue to prod him, which is to say, this is not a person who is either guilty of murder or attempting to play the part as though they feel like they're guilty of murder or in danger of being convicted, ever. Never at any time, no. Right? So briefly, as a person who's researching the character of Nick, she already knows everything about the guy before she ever has any real interactions with him. So like, she's constantly like using other people's lines in other scenes. Yes. Like
she does that all the time, and it's like, well, you weren't there. Were you there?
Are you everywhere?
Is how I would react if I was Nick. I would be like, well, that's weird because I was like, they literally said that just now.
Yeah, she knows everything. And also, if you're a writer trying to research a character for a novel, and you already have his motive, his intentions, and his story before you've ever talked to the guy, what the hell do you need a relationship with him for? You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason for her to get involved with him at all.
She kind of says it's the fucking
right. That's what she says, and
she's like I like fucking him. She does. I mean, she says that. That's like one of her opening things. She's like, I wasn't in love with that guy, but I like.
I didn't say I loved him. I said
he gave me pleasure.
Yes, you still get the pleasure.
Like, what about Manny, the boxer? Yeah. He's like him too.
Right. Well, she did say she liked Manny.
She didn't love Manny, but she liked to fuck him.
I think that's true. And like, sure, that could be an explanation, right? She could have just been having sex with Nick because she enjoys it, but she is the one who frames it as though I'm doing this for a book when she already has all the information. She like literally has it all. So there is no reason for her to need to do this for the book. It's definitely for her own sort of, I guess malicious purposes. I'm not really sure. She definitely enjoys messing with the guy. So
you never done that? You never put on an elaborate, like
an elaborate seduction
when you're like trying to date someone. And you're like, no, let's just hang out. Why? Because I'm writing a book about you.
I'm gonna write about you, girl. No, I haven't generally in my seduction, my honey traps, deployed, like, wasted the resources of numerous government agencies. I haven't done that, but maybe that's the real sweetness, and I have to figure it out.
Well, that's how I do it.
Yeah. You had a thing going with the Department of Water for years. I remember.
Writing a book about it.
Yeah, I bet you are. Got a great screenplay on the way. All right, so briefly, not that briefly, honestly. So again, on the acting, nobody except for Catherine can hide their feelings. Every other person in this movie reacts immediately with the way they feel about things, especially Nick. Like, Nick is the most fragile person you can ever imagine, right? He doesn't have any cleverness or obfuscation at all. He's pure reaction. But Catherine is a complicated, layered person who is able to navigate feelings and know when her feelings don't help her, which is to say she's the only person who is an actual character, and she's the one writing the story, right? So she's the actual human. The rest of us are not. And that's a meta-narrative clue, I would argue. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
So I've talked about the mirrors and fragments thing. I talked about the looking right into camera thing. We've talked about the lie detector thing. So, okay,
There was another thing that you also said I wanted to bring up, is that I thought it was really interesting how you said how people, because you just said that she's like the only real person. Right. It's so funny looking back. There's like one scene where he goes to UC Berkeley to investigate Lisa Oberman, who turns out she said Hoberman.
Which is insane. That's an insane thing.
Turns out to be Elizabeth Gardner, his psychiatrist. Yeah. And when he's searching, which is a crazy scene because it's like, okay, so we're just showing like menial police work. But then there is this one hint, and it's like it makes sense of why that scene exists, is that it doesn't show up on the computer when he keeps searching for it, and the clerk says, or he says to the clerk, like, "You're sure that this can't be a mistake?" And the desk clerk says, "If there's a mistake, you're making it," which is not something someone would say if they're doing like a search on Google.
To a cop.
Like, not to a cop. It's not like you just be like, "No, I'm sorry, I can't find that name." Right. But it's like, the way she phrases it is, "You're making a mistake."
Right, exactly. And like,
and then literally the next plot point is him understanding, "Oh, I've made a mistake."
See, I didn't make that connection, and I love it, because like, again, if you pinpointed every single side character and watched the way they interact with Nick, you're gonna see none of them are doing things or saying things that they would say. Like, so
no, they're all acting like. They're acting, which is why I understand where you're getting with the meta-narrative now. They're archetypes of the characters as if they're a vessel. They're both acting as the vessel and the archetype, but they're speaking as if they were written by someone who's self-aware of the narrative. In other words, they're being written by Sharon Stone or by being written by Paul Verhoeven / us to say like, and then they're basically there for a red herring. So it's like, it's okay, so this character who is the red herring says literally like the definition of red herring and why they are it.
That's it. Yeah, I do. Mean? That's it. Exactly. Right. Or like, I was going to make this joke about that cop who basically seems like he's getting paid to wash cop cars. Like, he's just out there. He's out there hosing down the cop car, which is like, why would anybody be doing that? And he's basically just there to tell Nick about the death of Elizabeth Garner's husband. Like, he's not doing any cop work, No,
he's doing
right. That's impossible.
Yeah.
Just because I want to make sure we cover all the camera related things that we can, because those are the things that I feel like you and I are uniquely qualified to talk about. So
hit me.
We talked a little bit about the mirrors and the fragments. I just want to label a couple other times that obfuscation is used to tell us that what we're seeing is not a thing we can rely on. So like, one of the motifs in the movie is that Catherine's house has a pool in it. Right? And like, not in it, but like right outside of it. That pool is one of the most reflective pools you've ever seen in your life, because anytime
they use it
a lot, and it wouldn't be that reflective in general. So it's clearly intentional that we're using the the obfuscation technique because it makes you feel like there's something between us and the actor, right? And that's also when we get a lot of particularly explosive or interesting pieces of information. They'll often happen with that water or with like rainwater or the reflection of the pool over the actor's face so that you feel like you can't trust it. So that's just another time. They use the bars of the headboard. They use it twice. They use it at the beginning of the movie when the murder actually happens, and then they use it again anytime Sharon Stone is actually initiating sexual contact in the movie, like during the big sex scene, for instance. They use the bars to indicate that to imply she's going to murder him, right? To set up that sexual act.
Yeah, she's caging.
Correct, exactly. And also we're obscuring her motives, right? So like that's why. So it's just a thing that's like sort of regularly done in the movie, and just like a funny comment, just so you understand that Verhoeven knows exactly what he's doing. So like there's a moment when after they've slept together, he comes down and like she's having some weird breakfast or whatever out on the beach, some meditation out on this beach she lives on. And then he walks down, they have this dialogue, and then they kiss each other, and they kiss in front of a fire pit, and Verhoeven intentionally frames them so that the fire is right between them. You know, like, which is like, man, they're burning hot for each other. So like...
Yeah, right on their groins.
Exactly. Like if you want to know the sensibility of the filmmaker you're dealing with and whether these things are intentional, that's the scene that should tell you that. You know, like fire right between them. Okay. So now I want to talk about and I'll do this briefly because I know we've gone over a little bit. I want to briefly talk about sort of like what is the movie actually saying about sex? And the reason I want to talk about that is because I feel like that's the thing that we all remember the most from this movie. And so I want to kind of say, what are we saying here? So the movie is constantly using sex to either obfuscate or to imply that this whole thing is being written. The first way is that during the famous interrogation scene, we're using sexuality as a distraction from the actual crime. And the way that you can tell, what I mean by that is essentially they bring her in to question her, right? She refuses an attorney, which means she has quote unquote nothing to hide. And then very early in this scene, she begins to sort of frankly display her sexuality. And I mean not even just with the uncrossing of the legs. I mean, she's taking off her shirt. I mean that she's acting in a way that's like clearly intended to entice. And the men in the room are fundamentally baffled by this. They are bamboozled.
Wayne Knight is the best cast ever.
He kills in this movie.
He's so sweaty.
His
it's
sweat.
Like he's looking at He's as wet as if he's looking at a velociraptor.
He really is. And just briefly, he sees the moment when she uncrosses her legs. It's not implied. Yeah. It's like stated.
His brow furrows. Yeah,
he sees it. Then Nick is like, "Yo, man, that's not for you," like with a look. And then he's like, "Oh, my bad," as though this woman has like sorcerer's powers with seduction, right? Like she is.
She does.
She is a magician with her seductive powers, which is to
it always lands the way that she wants.
And like she is able to control a conversation with 6 seasoned cops just with her seductive prowess, right? That is what the scene is saying, which is to say that sex is not a reliable, like makes this scene unreliable, right? And if you think that I'm overdoing it, the moment where she actually begins to overtly flirt with Nick is the moment where score comes in, which means where the director's deciding this is the moment I want to underline emotionally for the scene, this seduction right here. And it takes her like 5 or 6 questions thrown directly at Nick, who is the cop investigator, for anybody else in the room to be like, do you guys know each other? Which is like, that's the first thing they would have said. They would have said that right away.
Immediately subtext of everyone just had to find an in.
Yes, it's completely
before they asked. That's all that was.
Right,
because they were too busy with the sex eyes that they're just waiting.
Like this woman's powers of sex are so strong that the instant she flirts with anybody, they got to get up and get some water. They're running dry the minute.
So you said something. You were like seduction as writing.
Yes,
because I understand the distraction aspect.
So they talk about sex as they talk a lot about about sex in a sort of writery way. So like anytime they're actually flirting with each other, they're doing screenwriting. So, for instance, when her and Nick actually get into the actual flirtation, they rewrite and repurpose each other's lines. It doesn't happen before that in the movie. It's the first time it happens, right? They make plays on words. Mm-hmm. They recontextualize everybody else's lines. They swap backstories that neither of them could possibly know, right? As like meaning like so she knows Nick's wife's like nickname for him, you know what I mean? Like just stuff like that that's very much
impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible, and also it's like the kind of thing a writer would do. It's like, I know your backstory, and I'm going to use this cute nickname because it has emotional value to you. She actually hands him a book during this seduction act, like their first foreplay act, right? And then the best line of the movie, I would argue, is he says to her, "I'm in love with you already, but I'll nail you anyway. You could put that in your book." Meaning he's aware of like the nature of their flirtation is writing, and you should write it down, right? And then, so like to contrast that, anytime we're talking about plot or motivations of characters, they bring up the idea of masturbation, right? It comes up several times. Nick, when he's interrogated by the psychiatrist, the first thing he does is make a masturbation joke. Gus,
talks about his hand. Yeah.
Gus explains that he's jerking off to the computer when he goes to give this important fact about the kind of people Catherine associates with, right? Which is a plot thing. So that is to say that foreplay is writing, and that plot and emotions, which are usually the substance of a movie, that's masturbation, right? Which means that sex is sex in this movie, you know, and that's really interesting.
So, from a story standpoint, plots and emotions are interchangeable and frivolous.
Yes.
In the same way that masturbation is. So as a meta-narrative, which is only to talk strictly about structure and about purpose of like character or purpose of writing, that is the truth. That is the only things that actually matter, and that's sex. Masturbation is just how you kind of like that's just
gets you there.
Experiment in frivolity because you're just that you can skin in a movie any way you want.
It's in every other movie, and like this is just a clue for everybody who is interested in filmmaking. Plotting and motivations for characters, that is the engine of a movie. That's the thing that makes people interested in it, the emotional content. In this movie, that's masturbation. Which is to say, the sex scene or the action scenes, those are the scenes that are the quote-unquote juice of the movie. And that's the opposite of how movies actually work. So this is a person who's making the statement that like this movie is not narratively trustworthy. It's just a joyride. It's literally just a joyride. Oh. Yeah. So just to wrap up this theory, so if it's a meta-narrative, what is the meta-narrative saying? Right? And I have two theories. My first theory, and I think it's the one that I've done the best job proving, is that this is about sort of how absurd and pulpy the erotic thriller genre is. Like, as a genre, the erotic thriller doesn't really happen in human experience. So it's really more about titillation and over-the-top sort of, like, tension. And this movie is like, what if we went way over the top for the purposes of showing how absurd that is?
Yeah.
Right? So it's a commentary on that level. Yeah. The second one, and I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but is that this is actually a story of what it's like to date as a middle-aged person. So like I knew you were going to like it.
Of course.
So
of course, that's a Tinder.
Yeah, this is 40-year-old Tinder. Here it comes. So like each person in this movie, most of the movie is they both have a lot of baggage, right? Neither of them have the ability to get intimate. And like, by the way, just so everybody knows, there's a horrifying sexual assault scene in this movie. And like, I think some people need to know that in case they want to watch it. It's triggering, warning. And it's with Jean Triplehorn's character, and it's pretty early.
And it's almost just as dark because she's like, she calls him out on it, and she's just like, "What you did isn't making love."
Yeah,
and he's
you've never been like that before.
And
she says.
Because because he was so hot for Sharon Stone, that he like projects it onto her, and she's like doesn't want it that way, and it's very, very
yes, it's not a good look. It was bad at the time, and it's worse now, and I think that's on purpose. But that is to say, both of these people are extremely damaged. right? Like they both have like history, they both have exes that are like that have like sort of a sad past, and this whole thing is the only way they know how to meet someone again. They have to play out their pathology in order to meet someone again, and they have like things have to align just right for them to be able to get into a relationship, which is ultimately what happens in this movie. This movie is ultimately the story of two people meeting and finally falling in love with all of their brokenness. Like, that's really it. And so, and like the last line of the movie is a discussion about whether or not they're going to have kids. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. It's like, okay, what do we do now? I don't know. Have sex like minxes, get some Rugrats,
See, that was
live happily ever after.
So to your dating theory, because that's the last line is like, so what are we gonna do next? And it's like, fuck like minx, have some Rugrats, live happily ever after.
And then she's like, she contemplates killing him at that point.
Right, and then so only after it is he says, forget the Rugrats.
And then, no, I'm not going to kill you.
Because he's making a joke. Yeah. And then she's like, yeah, and puts down the knife. And she's like, and then they fuck again.
Right.
So, and that's like, as we fade out. So I think Paul Verhoeven is actually, it's not dating in your 30s. It's no kids.
I mean, kids ruin relationships. Like kids are murder.
Kids.
No, but like just like two more points on the dating thing. They have a scene when they finally get together that takes place in a club. That club is impossible, and they do not belong there. They're both that club is too old. Woo! Yeah, the club's horrible, and they are way too old, and it feels like they're trying very hard to be sexy, and it's the least sexiest thing in the movie by far, and I feel like that's
it is the best. Yeah. It's my favorite scene. It's so good because it's what I love is that it's Michael Douglas, right, in all of his
in his late 40s, maybe
wearing like clearly 90s clothes, like they got the fucking sweater that's weird, not the sweater like. Not the sweater necks, but like just like you recognize Ross wore it on Friends at one point.
Easily,
and he's just standing there like a fucking awkward statue. And Sharon Stone's just like orbiting him and like putting her butt right on the business. And he's just like,
he's just like nodding along like here I am.
Not going to dance. I refuse to dance. And everyone is like dancing like it's Zion from the fucking Matrix movies. Like everyone's going ham. And he's just like, no.
He's like, I can't dance. So I'm too busy being a detective in this club.
And I don't know what Verhoeven was doing, but I love it because it's just who decided it was a good idea. He did, and thank you.
Well, it's so funny because like there's 100,000 other ways to render a club, and that one doesn't belong in this movie even. Like it's too colorful and it's too vibrant and it's too absurd.
It's obviously not like Blade or something like that, where it's like, you know,
it shouldn't be Blade.
It's like a hardcore, but it's very dancey.
Oh yeah,
like not the professional. Like everyone else in this movie looks like Mulder and Scully. Yes. Imagine Mulder and Scully going to a rave.
And again, like I can't say this enough. If you've ever been to a club, Abe, which I have been, but not for quite some time, when somebody crosses the 40-ish threshold and they aren't with other people, those people are like aliens. They do not belong in that environment. You know what I mean? Like that is how you treat those people. That's how it seems. And I'm not saying that because it's right. I'm just saying this is how it is, right? So like it felt very much like, what are they doing there? They don't belong there at all, and it's not a sexy place for them to meet. What are we doing? You know, and it felt like they're trying too hard. It feels like they're trying too hard.
All right, you know? Yeah. So you're saying that's middle-aged dating?
Yeah, yes.
They shouldn't be there.
When you're trying to date and you're older and you like do the dating tropes, it's like
you gotta create,
and it feels so uncomfortable because like it's just like, oh, when I was younger, this is what I used to do. Now it's now I feel like I don't know how to do it anymore. And why am I here? You know, like
and everyone's just like, when do we like each other? Can we all know how this goes,
right?
You know?
And also, like Sharon Stone has been not even a little bit pretentious about wanting to bed him down. So in the club scene, suddenly she's like turning him away and like teasing him with Roxy and like trying to make him jealous. And their seduction is like literally a mating dance. You know, and it's very like, what do we do? Like the whole scene didn't need to happen at all. They could have skipped the whole thing. You know?
It's my favorite scene.
Anyway, So other than a couple of jokes I wanted to make, I feel like that's really my theory. Just last comment I wanted to make about the movie before I move on is there's a moment after the first murder where they put on these glasses that allow them to see cum stains, and those glasses are a true police miracle. Because what, they have cum stain glasses? No, those are just, what?
Those are just Michael Douglas's. He just brought them to set.
They're like these red blue blockers or something that are there's a detective whose job is to wear them and be like, guys, there's cum stains, and then he hands it over and they're like, oh my god.
It's just like, all right, the cum guy's here. He's brought his glasses. He comes in, he's like, looks at the bed. He's like, yeah, that's a lot of cum. Because that's the other thing is if you get a shot through the glasses, and it's just a lot of cum.
It's right. It's a fountain. It's like.
But I assume because I don't know how those glasses work, because under the black light doesn't blood also do
right.
it.
That's why it couldn't be a real thing.
It's just it's. I thought it was just organic.
No,
material,
it's like he programmed RoboCop's vision just to isolate cum and then put him in these glasses.
Hell
you know what I mean?
Dude.
It's totally ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense at all. Boy, oh boy.
It's the sequel to RoboCop, Cum Cop.
What a movie. What a movie.
So going back to your theory, I love this theory. This is great because I never knew how to, it'd been a while since I'd seen it. I always thought of it as kind of a satire, but I never actually went to the meta-narrative aspect of it, where there's so much that it's so clear that all the distinctions that Paul Verhoeven is doing, especially with having characters say explicitly who they are and what their purpose is in the narrative, having things not make sense on purpose, and the fact that when you line them up, it's just so much shit that doesn't make sense. Making specifically making maneuvers by the directorial, with camera. Showing things like the inserts of who's got who's wearing a wig and when, not really working and almost feeling like a mistake, all the way down to the just the imagery of the mirrors and stuff, and the fracturedness of the tale, and the fact that she's a writer. It all kind of coalesced for me, and I definitely think that the theory's up to snuff.
Where you lost me is.
My question is, why is it called Basic Instinct?
Great question. I really thought about that. I'm guessing that it's a play on sort of Nick's instinct about her is that she's responsible, and it's that, and also sort of the idea of sex. You know what I mean? Underline sex.
Yeah. Usually we talk about Basic Instinct as our more animalistic desires, I guess. Which I don't think this movie has a lot to say other than we are victim to our animal side is maybe something he's trying to say.
I guess
we can't help ourselves but want to fuck.
I guess so,
but that's not really what it's
not really
saying.
No,
it's not really. It's saying so much. It's saying something different, I think. And so I thought that was weird. I did think of a really good name for this movie, though. A good name for this movie would be The Game.
Right? I know, exactly, right? That's exactly what it should be.
Because because it's all a game.
I mean, exactly. That. I do think that. Can you imagine if Fincher had made this movie, how it would feel?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it'd be any better, honestly, but it would not be as over the top. It would be a lot drier, and I think and
I really think that Michael Douglas was the perfect choice for the movie that I'm now going to call The Game.
And that will never confuse anyone ever again. Because he was sort of the main guy in this genre at this point, right?
Yeah, that's true. Because he kind of has he's the older fuckable guy.
Well, I think Fatal Attraction is sort of the main text for this genre. That's the
he was doing Romancing the Stone a few years before.
And I think because he was in Fatal Attraction, he's sort of the premier talent in this genre for a little while. Although I don't know if he ever did another movie after this in this genre. I'm not sure. I mean, he did The Game.
One of my favorite parts about Verhoeven's is that he does, kind of in the same way that we're describing the club scene, he does inexplicably random things.
Yeah.
That whereas before your argument was these are random, they're random and wrong. So then, because they're for example, everyone on the force is irrational. but they're irrational in a way, like, so they're wrong, but they're irrational in like a crazy way.
Right.
Right? He will do stuff that it's like there's no reason for it to be crazy, and he still wants to do it. Like, one of my favorite moments is like multiple times it gets multiple inserts in this movie because it's a pair of keys on the key ring is Bart Simpson.
I know why. Why is Bart Simpson on this?
These are almost 40-year-old.
Yeah,
these are 30
doesn't make
something
sense.
people.
I know.
Why would they have a Bart Simpson keychain?
And it's like it plays a part in the plot. By the way, like it matters as an image.
It plays multiple times. Multiple times.
Yeah.
I think it's probably because Nick and Bart are both bad boys.
Well, I mean, people like to sort of imply like that Verhoeven's sort of like that crazy European guy. Like that's kind of his sensibility.
Yeah, okay.
But like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of European filmmakers and he's unique among them. And he does have a sort of consistent like exuberance to his style that I think in the 90s we started to get a little bit more eyebrow raisy about. It was a little bit like, like for instance, Showgirls is also in this sort of over-the-top exuberant tone, but that movie is largely considered one of the worst movies ever made, and then got a cult following because there's a certain percentage of people that love his weird thing. Like, they love his weird thing, you know?
Yeah. And other directors have done this kind of meta-narrative to like an equal effect, but he's like, I immediately thought of when I was rewatching this, I was like, this reminds me a lot of Cronenberg's History of Violence.
Interesting.
Because everyone is acting like what they're supposed to act like. I'm an 80s bully, you know, and is more or less what that kid should be saying when he beats up Vigo's like kid. There's just weird, like it's like surrealist film.
Yeah.
When you actually look at it, even though it isn't as surreal as something like a David Lynch, where it's like you get surrealist imagery mixed with like random things that you can't decipher until you have seen it and have to like watch it again, or if it's just done as a tone poem. He's definitely making narratives, and they're familiar narratives, but he's much like Starship Troopers and stuff like that. Because I know that he's done this, what appealed to me about your theory is not just that this was that it's a Paul Verhoeven, therefore it should be a meta-narrative. He's done it so many times that I'm like, well, yeah. But it's true that it is truly when he hit his... It was like his first. It was
turned
like
the corner here.
He hit his full stride and he said, this is all of the movie. Like, even RoboCop has elements of it, but he's not like, okay. And True Recall the same. Like, he's not exactly going... I'm going to make my whole movie out of just the texture and fabric of what a meta-narrative is. That's all the movie is. And then by the time he gets to Starship Troopers in, I think, 97, he's just full on saying, like, this is the type of...
Like, this is his Dr. Strangelove, which if you're a Kubrick fan, Dr. Strangelove's kind of the moment that Kubrick starts making real Kubrick movies. Like, he'd made a bunch of movies, but, like, Strangelove's the first time that sort of, like... that his weird detached sort of maniacal feeling that you get to all the rest of his movies, it starts there.
Because if you watch Paths of Glory,
that's just a good movie.
Like that, he's very competent, and he's like, it's very smart, but it's still making like the narrative films. It's like another good example is like Miller's Crossing and the Coen Brothers. You know, it's just like, we just want to make a straight gangster movie. But then you go to like Raising Arizona and you go, holy shit, these guys are...
And Verhoeven's not just a tone. Like, he's not just Wes Anderson, but this version. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean that Wes Anderson's just a tone either, but Wes Anderson has a really distinct style and tone that carries through all of his movies, and that's not what I think Paul Verhoeven is. I do think he has a distinct style and tone and set of interests, just like Tarantino does, but I think he's also a little more than those things, and this is the moment where I started to believe that about his movies.
Yeah, I think it holds water, man.
Interesting.
Yeah, my favorite parts of the movie, or what really like made me lean forward, were when people would say something that is almost haunting when it's said out loud. And they play it straight. Like the example I gave about the clerk saying, if there's a mistake, you're making it. Like, it seems like you're not talking about the thing we're talking about. You're talking about like a thing that the movie's about, like something that I did in a different scene that made me start to like, even though I'd already seen the film and I wish I'd seen it only for the first time. Cause then with how I am now with how I watch movies, cause it always changes for everybody throughout the years. I kind of was like, oh, I wish this was the first time I saw it, because I might actually think like, oh, this movie is actually like this is actually like the game.
Right.
This is like a movie where everyone's
Right.
in on it and they're all turning against because of some off-screen like horrible thing that someone
Right.
did. Because it all seems to be surrounding him in a surrealist way, kind of like Truman Show does. But Truman Show is like playful and fun. This is like imagine reverse Truman Show, where everyone's watching you and constantly suspicious, and you don't know how, but you keep getting away with it. But all you do is get deeper and deeper into the suspicion, and everyone's like starts to loathe your presence. That would be a certain type of hell for some people. I definitely wouldn't like it, and it definitely is visceral in its recreation of that kind of feeling.
Yeah. He's a really fascinating filmmaker, because I don't think that we think of him as like one of, I don't know if, I think he's still alive, but maybe he's not. We don't think of him as like one of the greats as filmmakers, I would say, but he's a known quantity, but he's not like in the, I don't know, Spielberg or, Scorsese or somebody like that.
Yeah, it's crazy for having made Total Recall and Starship Troopers, for how cult following
Right.
he is, that he's never really, like, it's almost like we want him to forever stay in the cult.
Yeah.
Even both of those movies are fairly well
So is Basic
known
Instinct,
by most
and
people.
so is RoboCop. That's 4 big
Yeah,
movies. That's a lot of movies,
I think it's his ability to be a chameleon and jump between those so much that he never stayed. He always stayed relevant, but never stayed too relevant. You know
and
what
I
mean?
think also that, like, to use an analogy that's going to bum out a certain percentage of people, like Paul Verhoeven is sort of on the U2 journey in the 90s, which is to say he's doing a sort of like thick irony shtick that starts here.
Yeah.
Because that's what U2 was doing in the 90s, right? They pivoted away from their sort of earnest anthem rock. And I think that means a certain percentage of people see the value of what they're doing, and then a certain other percentage of people be like, that's not interesting anymore. We want like a more authentic version of that, and so they don't think of him as making great movies. But this is a good movie when you observe it through the lens of what it's trying to say. It's not just pulpy bullshit. And then, like, also just for anybody who's interested in making films, the way that he shoots the interrogation scene is like one of the most interesting shot plans I've ever seen, because most interrogation scenes are pretty locked or they're like gritty. His is not gritty. It's this like furious dolly, like technical thing that makes it feel like it's more than an interview. Like it's an interview, but it's more than this, because the camera moves are so over the top and people are so tropey. You know what I mean? Did you notice that when you were watching it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's like, it's the point of the scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
It dwells on people too long in order to show you that, and then that's why you have to notice it. So it's like, why aren't you cutting away? I thought this was just a moment of like, and then there's a shot of that person and they're reacting, and then we stay on them and they do something else. It's like, it's very bizarre. It's a hodgepodge of
Wayne
emotions.
Knight like leans from out of focus into the giantess close-up of him in his film career and says like, did you murder this person? And then we cut to that weird frontal shot I was talking about that's like a long dolly into her, and it's like, I've never seen an interrogation shot like this ever. Like, you can't even imagine it in any other movie. Anyway, really cool director, and thank you for listening to my theory.
Yeah. I think your theory has a lot of merit. No matter how you try, I'm never going to agree that U2 is a good band.
I knew I was teeing you up for that.
Even if you use Basic Instinct
you're
if
mistaken
Basic
about
Instinct
that.
good, then U2 good.
All I'm going to say is, have you ever
no.
seen the Zoo TV tour?
No.
Have you ever seen it?
I don't know what that is.
So everyone should check this out. In the early 90s, U2 did this album called Octoon Baby. It's fantastic. It has Mysterious Ways and One on it, if you're familiar with those songs. And they did this tour that was about sort of like media distortion, and it was called the Zoo TV tour. And it's super 90s, but it also is like weirdly a kind of above the 90s, like looking at what the 90s were going to be right at the outset. And it's like one of the most expensive tours ever made, and you have to see the set. It's like fantastic, but very 90s. Anyway, go U2. U2 for life.
You are shameless. You are a shameless, petty man.
I earned it. I earned the right for this.
Yeah, no, that was a great argument.
Thank you.
That was a great argument.
Thank
you got me. not the YouTube thing. The other thing. Yeah, so next time it'll be me, and I don't know what I'm talking about yet because we recorded. It's going to be because of how recording works.
I hope it's about the movie Hook. I just really want us to cover Hook at some point.
You love determining. By the way, for everyone off of mic, he always just guesses what movies I'm going to do. And you're like, this is going to be the greatest. How about Hook this time? It's like you're making me your narrative.
It's like I'm trying to write your episodes for you.
Oh,
no. And then Abe turned up dead next week.
Oh, no, I'm Michael Douglas. All right.
Yeah.
Well, what a fun game.
It really was. Thank you.
Okay.
You too, man. Adios.